have learned that a life can tilt on the smallest hinge. A door opens, a sentence lands wrong, a paper slides across a table, and everything after must walk with a new gait. That afternoon, I stood behind a velvet curtain in a Manhattan ballroom, listening to a string quartet polish the same hymn for the third time while guests settled into gold chairs. The chandeliers hummed like a hive. Someone adjusted the microphone and asked if I was ready. I said yes. Because that is what you say when your future is lining up, like empty glasses, waiting for a pour. The ballroom had been staged to look like a promise. White peonies marched along the aisle. A wall of candles waited to be lit at the final vows. The wedding planner whispered like a priest, touching his headset as if it were a talisman. I should have been thinking about love. The quiet kind that takes out the trash and remembers allergies. Instead, I was counting exits and wondering why my chest felt tight. Perhaps it was the smell of the lilies. Perhaps it was the three people approaching through the service corridor. Heels and soles tapping a verdict onto the tile. They were my almost in-laws. A trio dressed in a precise palette of navy and certainty. The mother's pearls glowed like small moons. The father held a leather folio with court mourning calm. And their family attorney, a thin figure with careful hair, carried a document thick enough to bruise. I smiled, because performance keeps disasters at bay for at least 10 seconds. It did not work. We will do this quickly, the father said. Not unkind. Not kind either. Housekeeping before ceremony. The attorney placed the document on a cocktail table, turned it so it faced me, and clicked a pen that felt as loud as thunder. A standard power of attorney combined with limited management rights. He said, temporary, purely protective. Sign here, initial there. I looked down at my hands, then at the signature line that waited like a last step. Off an invisible cliff. Protective of what exactly? Family assets. The mother said, as if reading from a place card, this is our tradition. Our council insists you will have everything you need without worrying about details. Their smiles were practiced. Their eyes not. The quartet shifted into another hymn through the gap in the curtain. I caught a slice of the room tables named after old novels, a cake tall enough to require scaffolding, a photographer testing his flash on a vase. I tried to breathe past the lilies. It helped until the mother allowed herself one honest line. This is not your house, she said softly, with a little lift at the end that turned the sentence into a marble edge. You are staying here on pity. I have heard worse, but never in the minute before walking down a white aisle. I kept my voice level. My house is wherever I can set a kettle and pay the bill. The father spread his hands. Then you will admire the practicality here. The agreement ensures the family maintains continuity if something unfortunate occurs, death, incapacity. Scandal Life is a sloppy writer. The lawyer angled a second page forward, and this addendum places the escrow for wedding gifts and certain accounts under our stewardship for 90 days. Routine. I traced a fingertip over the embossed letterhead. The paper smelled faintly of ink and lemon oil. Someone in their office polishes furniture with the past. I could have argued the merits, the clauses, the sunset dates. I work in legal publishing. Footnotes are my weather. But I was not the only person with paper in this room. In my clutch lay a sealed envelope stamped with a red wax crest, the Hart Family Trust. 3 weeks earlier, a man named Marin Cole had handed it to me in a glass office near Bryant Park and said, your late uncle updated his instruments. You are the primary beneficiary. There is a video addendum on the flash drive. For now, we hold the liquid portion in escrow until probate. Do not rush to tell anyone. Wealth exposes more than it solves. I did not tell anyone. I did not tell my almost family, who believed I came from tidy scarcity and good manners. I did not tell the person I was about to marry, because I wanted to choose them without price tags murmuring in the background. Old-fashioned. Maybe. But I have seen numbers turn people into math problems. The envelope in my clutch held commas that could feed a city. It also held a lesson: money is a loud mirror. If the mirror must speak, let it speak later. Take your time. The attorney said, which meant take 30 seconds. A bridesmaid peeked in and froze. They want to start lining up. Her smile dimmed when she saw the folio. Is everything okay? Of course. The mother answered, we are simply clarifying expectations. She pivoted toward me, lowering her voice. You should be grateful. We even let you in the family photo. The sentence landed with the soft thud of a velvet hammer. I watched my own calm from a short distance, the way you watch a person cross thin ice. I do not sign legal documents at a cocktail table. The father's patience cooled by 1 degree. Refusal suggests uncertainty about your fitness to join us. I looked him in the eye. My fitness is not a committee vote. Something in his jaw pulsed. The attorney's pen hovered behind us. The planner was whispering into his headset, promising the officiant that the delay was only a minute. I thought about love again. The kind that holds your hand in hospital lobbies. The kind that reads the warranty before plugging anything in. Love does not shove a pen at you while the cellist tunes, love brings water. Let me be plain. The mother said, the pearls steady on her collarbone. If you do not sign, there is no ceremony today. A bright, ridiculous calm opened in me. It felt like standing in light rain after a long week. Then you should tell your guests to enjoy the canapés. Silence makes a shape. The 3 of them stood within it, measuring me as if I were a dress on a hanger that would not zip. The attorney recovered first. If you prefer, we can postpone the ceremony 1 hour. Give you time to consult someone. His eyes flicked to my clutch, to the sealed envelope. I had not mentioned. Sharp man. He smelled the lemon oil and the secret. An hour will not change the principle. I said, I will not sign an agreement drafted without my participation. Under threat, behind a curtain. The father closed the folio with a sigh that sounded like a door in winter. You are making a scene. I am making a boundary. The planner materialized. Panic, wrapped in beautiful cologne. We truly must begin. Guests are seated. The quartet is asking for relief. The kitchen is timing the fish. The mother's smile returned, brittle as spun sugar. Here's our compromise. She said, you walk, you smile. We celebrate, and afterward you do the prudent thing. Or, I asked, or you can explain to a ballroom full of people why the ceremony ended before it began. Her lashes lowered in a benevolent blink. People remember such things. They do. People remember moments that go public. Faces that flush. The tilt of a chin on a bad day. I thought about public and private, about what belongs to the room and what belongs to the spine. I thought about the envelope in my clutch. Its wax unbroken. Its commas asleep. I thought about the person waiting at the end of the aisle and whether they would step toward me without a contract drafted by their parents. Give me a minute alone. I said. They conferred with their eyes and retreated 3 paces, far enough to pretend courtesy, close enough to listen. I opened my clutch, touched the red seal with a thumb, then closed it again. I did not need to break it to know what it meant. The trust would not run away. Character might. I stepped out from behind the curtain. The room hushed in that pleasant way crowds hush when something lovely is about to happen. I walked to the aisle and stopped before the first row. The officiant's book hung half open. The quartet stitched a polite cadence. I turned not to the person waiting for me, but to the guests who had come dressed in hope. Thank you for being here. I said, voice steady. A radio turned to the right station. There is a document some people would like me to sign before vows. I have decided not to sign anything today except a promise that must mean more than paper. If that disappoints you, I understand. If it relieves you, I understand that too. A murmur moved across the room. Curious first, then kinned. The mother rose halfway, then sat. The father's folio remained closed, a dark rectangle on a bright afternoon. The person at the end of the aisle took one small step forward, and in that step I heard a question: do we choose each other? Or do we choose a committee's comfort? The answer would not live in this chapter. Stories that matter. Keep something back for the turn. I will tell you, only this a crash was coming. With metal and sirens and a headline tone, and the people who wanted my signature would learn that paper cannot bind a spine that has learned to stand. If you are listening with a cup of tea and an old heart, you already know the moral beginning to form. What is signed under threat is never a promise. It is a receipt. I folded my hands, nodded to the officiant, and chose the next sentence carefully. The way you choose a road when the sky is changing. Shall we begin? I said, with truth. People think money rewrites a soul. It rarely does. It simply turns up the volume on whatever tune was already playing. In my case, the music had been quiet industry and caution. I grew up learning to read the fine print before the headline, to note the date on a signature, to ask where the money sleeps at night. That education did not come from school. It came from a man who did not smile often, but meant it when he did. Douglas Hart was family. Though we had to count a few branches over to find the connection, he built Hart Urban, a real estate investment trust that liked unglamorous corners of the city post offices, clinics, mixed use boxes near trains, places that keep a life running even when no one posts photos of them. He believed in simple rules. Do not lie. Do not sign what you do not understand, and never use money to make a person smaller. He kept his office plain and his shoes polished. He lived alone, ate early, and sent me clipped notes on birthdays, one sentence of affection, one sentence of advice, one sentence about municipal bonds. I would save them in a shoebox labeled with a rubber band and a promise to visit more. The last time I saw him, well, he showed me a blank ledger, its paper almost blue in the winter light. This, he said, tapping the spine, is what keeps people honest. Ink. Then he looked at me hard. If someday there is a trust in your name, you will remember the difference between your needs and everyone else's plans for your needs. I nodded because it seemed like the kind of sentence an adult should nod to. I did not know he was rehearsing a goodbye. He died in spring after a short illness that was long enough to put his files in order. He left me a letter that did not waste words. I have it by memory more than paper now. He wrote that character is a dividend. It pays out when you least expect it. He wrote that he had placed a significant portion of his holdings into a vehicle with my name under the word beneficiary. He wrote that a good attorney would call and that I should listen without being impressed. The call came from Marin Cole, a woman with a throw blanket over her chair and a mind like a ruler. Her office faced Bryant Park. She kept a copy of a 19th century treatise on trusts near the window as if to sun it. She explained the structure with patience: a primary trust with operating rules, a liquid account in escrow during probate, a lineal descendant clause that would, in certain events, keep assets within the family rather than send them along to designated charities. Hart Urban supported. She said the instrument was updated 3 weeks before he died, witnessed by people who could tell the truth without stalling. She said the figure, after taxes and allocations, he would come to a number that sat down when you entered the room. $26 million. I went very still, the way you do when a glass almost falls, but does not. She handed me a sealed envelope with a red wax crest. Do not celebrate with anyone who asks to hold this, she said, and then smiled. The smallest smile, and do not panic. Money is a tool. A shovel can make a garden or a grave. I walked out into a city that did not blink. Men yelled about trucks. A woman cried quietly into a phone by the library lions. I took the long way home because I did not trust my own doors to open right. In my bag, the envelope sat like a new organ fitted to an old rib cage. It wasn't a secret I meant to hoard. It was a truth that needed the right table. Secrets and truths can look identical at first glance. The difference shows up later when someone reaches for them quickly. At that time, I was building a life with Riley. We met the ordinary way, friend of a friend, an evening too long, and a laugh that made the lights feel warmer. Riley made films the way some people make soup, throw in what is on hand. Let it simmer into something with heart. I liked their patience in an impatient city. Early on, we worked as a pair, the way you carry a couch, up a narrow stairwell, pivoting together, apologizing to the wall. Rent, rice, small victories. I kept my job in legal publishing because someone had to like dental insurance. Riley kept the camera charged and the dream fed. Then we met the family Riley came from, and the air changed by a few degrees. Old money carries its own weather. Their address did not boast. It simply implied they were pleasant in the way marble is pleasant, cool, smooth, and older than your plans. They asked me polite questions about my work, what imprint, which journals, whether the market still cared for print. And when I answered, their nods stacked neatly, like napkins. No one planned to stain. I was not offended. I have sat with worse, but it set a tone. To them, I was a decent person of decent means. Suitable if managed, ornamental if guided. Their lawyer attended brunch more than a friend should. Their crystal was heavy enough to discourage clumsy hands. I learned to count the silver before jokes landed. I never liked the word prenuptial. It enters a room with its chin up, but the concept is sound when both writers bring their own pens. I told Riley as much the winter we began to talk about vows. If we draft one, I said, we draft it together? No surprises. No midnight papers? Riley agreed. In that easy way, people agree when something is months away and the coffee is still hot. We picked a date and watched other people learn it, one calendar at a time. The in-laws offered a ballroom with chandeliers. I offered to pay for the band. The division felt clean until one afternoon, the mother sized me like a dress on a hanger and said, our council will prepare a standard agreement. Tradition is stability. I smiled and changed the subject to flowers. You can lose a battle by 2 inches and not notice until your shoes get wet. If you are still with me, tea cooling near your elbow. You might ask why. I did not tell Riley about the trust immediately. The answer sits somewhere between caution and experiment. I wanted to know whether love could hold without scaffolding. I wanted to understand my own instincts without a choir of commas singing in the background. I told myself there would be a right moment, a quiet dinner, a walk along the river. It was a laugh. We could fit the news into like a pearl into a pocket. I did not plan a ballroom ambush. I did not imagine anyone would use the word pity at an altar around us. As weddings do, the details multiplied the tasting with miniature forks, the seating chart that made peace between ex-friends, the rental contract that wanted initials on every page. I handled paper the way I always have, with respect, and a red pen. On nights when Riley stayed late at a screening, I would sit at our small table and read clauses as if they were gossip. I knew how language can turn. I knew how a sentence like "for the avoidance of doubt" means someone expects doubt to arrive with its shoes on. I was ready. What I was not ready for was the drift. It came quietly. Riley began to speak of our people and their people as if life were a map with shaded regions. The in-laws praised Riley's talent. In the second breath, offered introductions that required posture. There is a smile rich families teach their children at 11. It says, we will include you if your elbows fit our table without noise. Somewhere in there, I stopped being fun at parties because I asked where the money was coming from and why the invoice kept changing nouns. I am not a scold by nature, but I take care. Care makes some people itchy. I kept the envelope sealed. I visited Marin twice more to sign what needed signing and to ask the question that had worried the back of my mind since she explained the lineal clause. If I have a direct descendant, I said, the assets stay in the family rather than shifting to the charitable arm. If I do not, they shift at a defined schedule. She nodded. Your uncle believed in blood and public good in equal measure. The clause balances both. I stared at the signature pages. I have no child. I have a stubborn heart that thinks about a child sometimes when the train is quiet. I said as much. Marin folded her hands. It is simply a valve. It does not decide your life. It reacts to it. A week before the wedding, Riley came home late, smelling like other people's cologne, talking fast about a producer who liked the new cut and a benefactor who might put money into a feature if certain optics were tidied up. I listened, nodded, set out 2 plates. When I reached for Riley's hand, they pulled away to answer a text. It buzzed with a name I did not recognize. Just a colleague, Riley said, and kissed my forehead in a way that felt like punctuation. I do not tell you this to paint anyone a villain in advance. Most people simply want to stay where the lights are flattering. I tell you because the air in a life can change, and you will only notice when you try to draw a deep breath. 2 days before the ceremony, Marin called again. Her voice steady. Small housekeeping. She said, As executor. I received an inquiry that made me raise an eyebrow. A request for status from someone claiming familial authority using a surname that matches your future in-laws. It could be an error. It could be curiosity. I have declined to share anything beyond the public docket. As is proper. I thanked her and put the phone down carefully, as if noise might make a new fact spill. That night, I dreamed of water running under a door. In the morning, my neighbor's kid asked if I needed help carrying a box. I almost said yes just to hear an honest voice. Then the wedding day set its machine in motion. And you already know what waited behind the velvet curtain. Papers, pearls, a sentence meant to put me in a smaller chair. I did not sit. If you want to know what broke and what held, we will get there. For now, it matters to say this plainly. Long before the crash in the courtroom and the cameras, the damage had begun, not in the ledger or the escrow, but in the simple place where 2 people should have been reading the same page. When you feel a tug at your sleeve and look up to find a committee replacing your name with theirs, call it what it is, a preview. In the days that followed, people would claim surprise at how quickly the story turned. They would say the accident came out of nowhere. That betrayal is always a thunderclap. That is tidy, but not true. Betrayal usually begins as a whisper you agree to ignore. It clears its throat at brunch. It hands you a pen and calls it love. I have kept you long enough with foundations and weather reports, but I promised you a clear map, not a blur. So mark this place a trust sealed with red wax, a family that prefers marble to truth, a partner whose footsteps begin to lead toward other rooms, and me, standing very still, listening for the sound of my own spine. The next chapter will begin with sirens and a hospital smell that never quite leaves your clothes. Before that, picture a car, a damp ribbon of highway, and a watch in a small velvet box waiting like a punchline. I never got to deliver. The day turned strange the moment I left the ballroom. I do not mean the dramatic kind of strange with omens and thunder. I mean the quieter sort where a light stays green a beat too long and the city seems to forget its own rhythm. I traded satin for street clothes, thanked the planner for his patience, and slipped out a side entrance while someone tried to reassign the string quartet's afternoon. Outside, the air smelled like wet stone. I put the small velvet box with its watch back in my pocket. A gift I had meant to place in Riley's palm at dinner as a prelude to the truth folded inside that red wax envelope. Traffic along the FDR crawled. Drizzle turned the asphalt into a dark ribbon. I kept both hands on the wheel and both eyes on the white lines. My mind, unhelpfully, ran rehearsals. How to tell a partner about a trust that carries the weight of $26 million without making the room tilt. Start with the letter. I decided, read Douglas in his own words. Then the video on the flash drive. Then tea. Everything is easier with heat in a cup. 2 exits from home. A semi drifted into my lane. Lazy as a cow. I tapped the brakes. The truck corrected, then overcorrected. The trailer swung like a door in wind. A horn laid on too long. Tires spoke a language no person wants to parse. I saw a stripe of silver grill. It's far too close. I put the wheel hard right, just enough to miss the main swing, but not the insult that followed. Metal. Met metal at an unkind angle. My head snapped. Air blossomed white. And time lost its second hand. There is the sound of a crash, and there is the silence after. In that silence, you notice small things. The smell of talc from the airbag. A line of text on the radio display stuck on a vowel is your own voice asking the plainest question. A body can ask, "Can I breathe?" I could, with effort. Pain came humming in waves, each one taller than the last. Someone shouted. Someone swore. Someone prayed on my behalf with a voice that was not built for praying. I let the world carry me. Hospital hours have their own math. Morning can arrive 3 times. Night can forget to show up at all. The first face I remember was a nurse with hair the color of good coffee and a name badge that said Winters. She spoke in complete sentences and believed me when I said the light felt too bright. You have a concussion. She explained a leg that needs pins. 3 ribs that decided to argue with the steering column. And a collection of bruises you will learn by name. She adjusted a blanket with the tenderness of a baker folding dough. I am here until shift change. Call me if the room tilts. I asked for my phone. She nodded, placed it in my hand like a delicate instrument, and stepped back as if the call itself might be surgery. I dialed Riley, straight to voicemail. I left a message that began calm and became pleading in the span of one breath. I tried the in-laws' landline and rehearsed an apology to their machine. It did not pick up either. Pain medication makes grace easier. It also leaves you less protected when grace meets a wall. By nightfall, Winters returned with a plastic pitcher of water and a look I recognized from 1,000 small kindnesses. You learn to brace a person before you say the part that stings. We called your emergency contact. She said, we left messages. No one has arrived yet. She folded her hands. It happens. Sometimes, when people are frightened or confused, the first day can make cowards of the best of us. I nodded as if cowards were a species. I had studied. She dimmed the lights and placed a warm cloth over my eyes. Try to sleep. She said, the body does more healing in the dark than it admits. 2 days blurred into each other like ink in rain. I learned the names of the people who touched me. Foster, the surgeon, with steady humor. Alvarez, the detective, who asked gentle questions about the crash. Miri, a physical therapist who refused to let me apologize for wincing. I learned the language of pain scales, the polite way to vomit, the kindness of a straw. I also learned that a phone can become a small accusation. Texts went out from my bed like paper boats. None returned. By the 3rd morning, anger arrived. Late but decisive. I called again. This time Riley answered with music in the background and a voice pitched for a room full of people. I am in the middle of something. I described the middle I was in. There was a pause just long enough to count to 5. Then, do not make this a crisis. My schedule is full. Your partner is in a hospital bed. I said, that is a crisis. Another pause. Some of us are moving forward. Riley said, and hung up. It is hard to break a heart that has already been thrown through a windshield. Still, words can find new fault lines. Winters returned to find me white with fury and tried to coax logic into the room. Grief does not always present as tears. She said, sometimes it shows up with a haircut and a calendar. I laughed harder than the ribs allowed and then cried in that ugly way where the body makes its own weather. By afternoon, Nina appeared. The friend who knows where I keep my spare keys and how I take coffee when the world has lost its posture. She arrived with a bag of contraband snacks and the guilty eyes of someone who has seen something they wish they could unsee. She sat cross-legged on the visitor chair and opened her phone. I need to show you something before a cousin does. On her screen, a photograph from a gallery called Artemis. Riley holding a glass, arm around a young woman in a black dress. The caption read, "New chapter." The comments applauded newness. Another photo. This one. A story from a private account. Nina had permission to view a cake with a cursive message, "Just married," and a handful of people cheering in a loft with brick walls and rented fairy lights. My hands went cold. A prank, I said, though even the word sounded cheap. Nina shook her head. The paperwork is real enough for social media to do what social media does. A courthouse ceremony. Quick. I should have come sooner. I did not know how to start. I tasted metal and said nothing for a long minute. I wished for a fury that could stand upright. What came instead was a quiet that felt like the inside of a snow globe after someone stopped shaking it. At length, I asked Nina to help me open the red envelope in my bag. She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. Secrets grow teeth if you feed them too long. The wax broke with a small, disappointing pop. Inside lay Douglas's letter in his small, exacting hand. A schedule of assets, a clause summary written by Marin, a flash drive with a printed label that read, "Video addendum." I read the first line of the letter aloud because I needed a voice older than mine to steady the room. "Character is a dividend. It pays when the market is down." I exhaled and said, "Call Marin. Tell her we need to talk." Winters arranged a quiet consult room off the ward so we would not stage our grief in the hallway. Marin arrived with her calm in a gray coat and listened to our brief version of the past 3 days without interrupting. When I finished, she took out a legal pad. "Here's what we will do," she said. Voice, like a level placed on a crooked shelf. 1, we lock down all accounts already in escrow. 2, we place a notice at the probate court that any attempt to claim authority on your behalf must be verified in person with counsel present. 3, we prepare for the possibility that someone will file false papers. 4, we remember to drink water. I smiled despite the bruises. They held a little party. I said, "In a loft? New chapter." The caption said, "People love the idea of a chapter," Martin replied. "They forget stories, have auditors." That night, a woman I did not know darkened the doorway of my room. She wore a dress that would have behaved better at a cocktail table and carried a small purse with nervous hands. Riley stood at her shoulder, coiffed and polished. The smell of other people's soap, faint around the edges. Winters straightened and took one step forward. A guard dog with kind eyes. Riley put on a face I had seen only at charity events. "You are awake," they announced, surprised that facts can be stubborn. "We have been so worried." I asked, "This is Sloan." Riley said, voice smooth, "A cousin of yours, on your father's side. She reached out. She wanted to help." Sloan looked at me then, and something moved across her face that did not match Riley's script. She took in the IV pole, the bruises, in the way I held the call button, even when I was not pressing it. She took in Winter's stance and Nina's glare and Marin's notebook. She looked, to her credit, like a person who has just realized the bridge she is standing on was built over the wrong river. Riley produced papers from a new jacket pocket. "The doctors say decision-making may be difficult for you in the near term. Here is a simple power of attorney granting me temporary authority to manage certain accounts. Nothing dramatic. Sign here. Initial there. We will take care of everything." I closed my eyes for a count of 3. When I opened them, the world had not improved. I do not sign legal documents at bedside tables. I said, I do not sign them for people who host parties while my gown has a number written on it in mark. Riley's smile twitched. The dress on Sloane swayed slightly as she shifted her weight. Her hands tightened on the purse. Winter's voice cut through the air, gentle but iron. Any attempt to coerce a patient to sign documents while medicated will be noted in the chart. She said, security is 2 doors away. I baked them cookies. They arrived quickly. Marin stood. We also have video, she said, and placed her phone on the tray table. A clip from a camera in her office played in clean color Riley and Sloane 2 days earlier, submitting a sloppy short form of a death declaration and arguing about dates when asked for supporting papers. Sloane flinched at her own image as if the screen had thrown a drink. That is out of context. Riley snapped, we were grieving. Paperwork is confusing. Not that confusing. Marin said, I turned to Sloane, whose eyes had gone wide in a way that belonged to a different story. Who are you really? I asked, and who told you to be me? She opened her purse with care, as if something inside might break the room. From it, she drew a photograph, worn soft at the edges. A teenage face holding a bundled infant, the teenager's eyes too old for their own skin, a small crescent birthmark under the left jaw that my mirrors have shown me every morning of my adult life. Sloane's voice came out small and true. I have been looking for that face. She said, my face? My papers say closed adoption. This picture is the only tether I ever had. I thought Riley had found you for me. I thought this would be a reunion. She swallowed. I did not think it would be this. Most betrayals arrive with a headline. Some arrive with a confession they did not mean to make. The room went very quiet. Riley reached to snatch the photo. Winters was faster. Her hand, a metronome stopping a bad song. Marin breathed in slowly. Then out. Nina put both hands over her own mouth, because sometimes the heart tries to jump out through the lips. I looked at Sloane and saw the curve of a jaw I had seen on my worst birthdays. For a moment, the hospital fell away, and the past stepped close enough to touch. I felt a younger body in an exam gown, a pen pressed into a damp palm, a signature that made a small sound like a door unlatching. The grief I had filed in an old drawer opened, but it did not drown me. It handed me a tissue and said, now we speak plainly. You were used, I told Sloane, by someone who found my memory box and decided to make a map from it. We are going to find the edges of that map and tear it up. Riley laughed, but the sound had lost its footing. You have no proof of anything except bad taste in timing. We have enough, Marin said, and we will have more by morning. Security arrived a breath later, polite as ushers. Riley attempted a grand exit. The hall swallowed it. Sloane remained at the foot of my bed like a person who has missed the last train home. Winters pulled up a chair. I laid her hand on the back, like a promise. Nina found a tissue that had not been used and pressed it into Sloane's fingers. Marin closed her notebook and said, tomorrow we go to court. That night, I slept in thin slices. In one slice, I am back in the car counting breaths. In another, I am 16 with a pen. In a third, I am standing in a ballroom refusing a pen that was never meant for my hand. Morning brought oatmeal and pain and a plan. I watched the sun draw a pale rectangle on the floor and thought about what Douglas had called a dividend. Character pays when the market is down. Well, the market was down. Time to collect. If you have stayed beside me this far, a cup cooling and spine straight, you see where this must go. Paper meets paper. Truth meets the habit of lying. A courtroom door opens, and the echo inside insists on full sentences. The next chapter belongs to judges and filings, and the sound a gavel makes when it reminds people that a promise is not a costume. Hospitals teach you patience. Courts teach you posture. By morning, I had both. Marin arrived at dawn with coffee that tasted like cardboard and relief, followed by Winters with charts and the kind of smile nurses use to keep men with clipboards from behaving badly. Nina had slept in the plastic chair, her head at an angle that would make a chiropractor weep. Sloane sat at the foot of my bed like a traveler stranded between stations. She had the picture in her purse and the look of someone who has finally found the house on the map and is not sure she wants to knock. Here is our day. Marin said, drawing a square on her legal pad, "We will speak to the probate clerk to flag the file. Then we will appear for an emergency hearing in surrogate's court. The trust stays asleep in escrow. We keep the wolves in the hallway. You will not sign anything. You will not apologize. You will tell the truth once in short sentences." Winters slid me a plain sweater and a soft scarf. Hospital gowns have a way of making a person look available to bad ideas. I signed nothing but discharge to appear paperwork and let a wheelchair carry me through corridors that smelled faintly of lemons and dread. Riley texted twice on the way downtown. First, a line about grown-ups handling grown-up matters. Then a line that read, simply, "Do not be dramatic." I put the phone face down in my lap like a disobedient child. The courthouse was all high ceilings and hushed shoes, the kind of building that keeps its temper no matter who is shouting inside. We waited on a bench with the other people whose lives would turn on a gavel before lunch. Across the hall, Riley arrived in a jacket that had met an expensive hanger, flanked by their family's attorney and a confidence that did not check the posted rules. Sloane stood 3 steps behind, not quite with them. Not quite with us. She held her purse with both hands, as if it might try to run. The clerk called our case. We filed into a courtroom that looked older than most mistakes and took our places. The judge was a woman whose gray bob had frightened 100 ambitious lawyers into telling the truth. She reviewed the file, glanced over the rim of her glasses, and spoke in a voice that could sand a door. Petitioners seek temporary letters based on a claim of incapacity and death risk, coupled with proposed authority over assets presently held in escrow. Respondent, her eyes found me, is plainly alive and present. She turned to Riley. "Explain why you approached this court with papers suited to a memorial instead of a morning hearing." Riley's attorney stood, polished and bland. "Your Honor, my clients were operating under confusion and grief. There were conflicting reports about prognosis. They sought only to protect family interests, mindful of potential charitable diversions under the instrument's lineal provisions. Confusion," the judge repeated, as if tasting a spice to see if it had gone stale, and yet sufficiently unconfused to file forms, contact counsel, and attempt to obtain control of escrow. Side down, Marin rose. Calm lives in her bones. "We have 3 requests, Your Honor. 1, an injunction prohibiting petitioners from contacting the escrow agent or the trustee bank. 2, an order directing that any future filings regarding this trust require personal appearance by the beneficiary and counsel, not submissions by mail. 3, the permission to introduce a brief video from my office security system, which is regrettably relevant to intent." The judge nodded. "Play your film. Then we will discuss the meaning of family in the narrow way courts use the word." Marin placed her phone on the evidence cart. The screen lit the room with a cold truth. Riley and Sloane, 2 days earlier, seated in Marin's reception area. Riley sliding a flimsy document across a desk. Marin's paralegal pushing it back with a single gloved finger. Riley muttering about obstacles. Sloane staring at her hands. The audio was clean enough to catch Riley saying, "We just need temporary control. After the transfer, everyone wins." And Sloane whispering, She will be okay." Right. Then the clip froze on Riley's face, the kind of frame that makes a person famous for all the wrong reasons. Silence took its lap around the room. The judge leaned back. "I am old enough to remember when people lied without recording themselves." She said, "It saved time." Her gaze moved to Riley. "You will not contact the escrow agent, the trustee, the clerk, or any office with a seal, unless you wish to make the acquaintance of a different judge in a different building who issues orders involving bars." Riley's lawyer began a protest about context. The judge lifted a palm. "Counsel, it's sit. It will spare us both." Then the turn came. The one story's balance on. Without warning, Marin spoke again, softer. Now, Your Honor, there is one additional matter, delicate and central. The instrument contains a lineal descendant clause. We have reason to believe that clause is implicated. She looked to me. I nodded once. With the court's permission, I would ask Miss Sloane to address you briefly. Sloane stood as if she were rising in church. Her voice, when it came, was not a lawyer's voice or a liar's voice. It was a truth trying not to shake. I was adopted through a closed process. All my life, I have had this photograph. She held it up. The bailiff carried it to the bench. I believed Riley had found my birth parent and wanted to help us reconnect. Her eyes shifted to me, then back to the judge. I see now that was not kindness. I do not want anything that is not mine. I wanted a person. The judge studied the photograph for a long moment. She did not ask for drama. She asked for dates. Year. I answered 17 years ago in New Jersey. Sealed records. I signed because I was young and alone and the adults in the room were tired. The judge's face softened for the first time. Sealed does not mean invisible. It means careful. She tapped the file. We will not resolve parentage on the strength of a photograph. I will, however, order expedited genetic testing under seal. Given the potential impact on trust administration, counsel, prepare the order. Meanwhile, the trust remains under existing terms. No one touches escrow without a court order and a good reason in daylight. Riley stood, chest heaving against a shirt suddenly too tight. This is ridiculous. She is playing the victim. Sloane is confused. We were trying to prevent charitable waste. $26 million should not go to strangers when family exists. I was acting in the family's best interest. The judge turned her head, slow as a lighthouse. Whose family? She asked, and whose interest? She let the questions hang long enough for everyone to feel their weight. Sight down, or I will instruct the officer to find you a chair elsewhere. There are moments a life pivots, and everyone in the room hears the hinge. The bailiff handed the photograph back to Sloane. She held it like a fragile inheritance. Marin slipped me a note, just 3 words in her neat hand. You are steady. I folded it once and put it in my pocket as if it were armor. When the hearing ended, the judge granted every part of our motion and added a line of her own. Any attempt to misrepresent status, relationship, or capacity to third parties would be grounds for contempt if you must lie. She said mildly, choose a building without a stenographer? We left the courtroom into a corridor where the light was kinder. Reporters had not yet scented the story. Courthouse gossip moves fast, but not faster than elevators. Riley approached with the bright chill of a person who knows charm is cheaper than shame. This was unnecessary. They said, we could have handled it privately. As adults do not file death papers for people who can breathe. I replied, adults bring water. Sloane stepped between us, not protective of me so much as protective of a future with more oxygen. Riley. She said, voice clear. Now, you told me she was unreachable. You told me she would be honored if we married quickly. You used the word family like it was a rope. I am cutting it. She extended her phone. On the screen waited a text thread. Is ugly as mildew Riley drafting captions. Riley, workshopping the phrase new chapter. Riley, sending a link to a courthouse appointment booking page. Riley, calculating the dates for a honeymoon that would play well online. You are welcome. Riley snared. Cornered animals sometimes bite. I gave you a story. You had none. Winters, who had accompanied us like a quiet guardian. I took one step forward and did something. I will love her for as long as my memory works. She laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, just enough to remind the air of proportion. Sweetheart, she said to Riley, you are a story people tell other people when they want to explain why we put locks on doors. Security. requested by Marin. With a nod, gathered Riley and the family attorney, like rain gathers leaves. They were ushered toward the elevator. Riley threw one last line over his shoulder. "This is not your house," they said, echoing a sentence that had followed me from that ballroom. "You are just staying here on pity." I did not have to answer. The building answered for me with its marble. Its seal, its habit of putting people back in their correct size. We spent the afternoon in Marin's office, the kind of glass box that makes busy streets look like fish tanks. She drew the map, who would be notified, which accounts already carried holds what paperwork the lab would need for tests. Nina handled the steady flow of messages from friends who had seen fragments online and were composing paragraphs of righteous profanity. Winters left for her shift and returned with sandwiches we could chew without making our injuries worse. At some point, Sloane slid the photograph across the table. "I would like you to keep it," she said, "for now, until the lab has its say." I studied the image, the tired teenager, the wrapped infant, the small crescent shadow beneath a jawline that could belong only to the two of us. "I never kept anything properly," I said. I hid the memory box and told myself I was tidy. That was cowardice dressed as order. I pushed the photograph back. "You keep it. It has been yours longer than it has been mine." We sat in a circle of quiet that did not hurt. Marin broke it with practical mercy. "Two more items," she said. "First, a detective from Highway Patrol has questions about the crash. There are discrepancies in statements given by one witness who appears socially connected to Riley's circle. Second, the escrow agent flagged an attempted login from a device associated with a film company Riley formed last month. We have frozen everything tighter than a January pipe." "New chapter films," Nina said, reading from her phone. "Disgust, making the words taste sour. Of course, that is the name." "Of course," Marin echoed. Then, "Gentler, you are doing well." "Alex, I am sitting," I said. "It is the most adult thing I have done all week." Evening painted the office gold, then gray. Sloane stood to leave, then hesitated. Could we, she exhaled. "Could we take a walk sometime? Somewhere with trees? New documents. No court. Just air. Prospect Park." I said, "When the lab is done scolding our blood for being dramatic, I will bring tea." She smiled like a small window opening. "Deal." On the ride back to the hospital, my legs still wanted a bed more than a bench. I watched the city go about its business. People carried groceries and mistakes. Dogs reminded their owners to stand in the present tense. Above it all, the courthouse dome kept its quiet promise, not fairness, in the abstract, but attempts at it daily, with ink. In the ward, Winters tucked me in as if the day had been a long swim and I had just reached the wall. Nina put the phone on, do not disturb. Marin left with her gray coat and her ruler mind, promising to text the lab order first thing. I lay there, a person with fewer illusions and more paperwork, and looked at the ceiling until the white squares stopped rearranging themselves into terrible futures. When sleep came, it did not take me to the crash. It took me to a kitchen I have never owned. All afternoon, light and chipped mugs. Somewhere off stage, a kettle began to sing. Someone, maybe me, maybe a younger me, said, "Money is a loud mirror." Someone else answered, "So is love." The kettle clicked off. Feet crossed a wooden floor. A door opened to let weather in. Morning would bring blood work. Affidavits. Maybe a headline if a board intern needed. Clicks. It would also bring a new understanding that a family can be built two ways, by accident of biology and by act of will. If the lab gave the first kind back to me, I would meet it with care. If not, I still had the second kind, already holding coats and pouring tea. For now, I will give you this. I did not break. I bent. Paper tried to make a person smaller. A room full of facts refused. Riley wanted a stage. The court offered a ledger and a photograph carried in a purse for 17 years. Did what paper does. When it is honest, it told the truth without making a speech. There are days when truth walks into a room with boots on. That morning, the boots belonged to a detective and a clerk, followed by Marin with her briefcase and Winters with her unshakable smile. The courthouse air felt charged. Even the marble seemed to hum with a kind of anticipation. I had rehearsed my sentences the way a person rehearses prayers, short, plain, without excess decoration. I knew today was not about feeling, it was about standing. Riley arrived late, as if lateness itself were a crown. Their jacket carried the smell of fresh tailoring. Their eyes darted across the benches, weighing allies. Sloane followed, not at their shoulder this time, but trailing by a careful distance. She looked younger than the night before, the way people do when they realize they have been sold a false map. The judge entered and everyone rose. I felt my ribs complain and my leg remind me of metal pins. But I stood anyway. The gavel came down once, and with it, the noise of the hallway dropped away. Petitioners will state their claim. The judge intoned. Riley's attorney launched into a speech about responsibility, about confusion, about family interest. The words stacked neatly. Too neatly. Like furniture placed to hide a hole in the floor. Then Marin rose. She did not raise her voice. She simply pressed play on a recording the video from her office where Riley and Sloane had tried to pass off false papers. The sound filled the chamber, Riley muttering about temporary control, Sloane whispering questions she clearly did not understand. The judge let the silence afterward linger. I have rarely seen intent laid so bare. She said, "This is not confusion. This is construction of lies." Riley shifted, smoothing a lapel. With respect, Your Honor, we were grieving. People misinterpret. Stop. The word from the bench cracked the air. You do not get to blame grief for fraud. Then, Marin placed another folder on the table. This one carried the crest of the state lab. Inside, expedited results, sealed envelopes, but she had obtained the judge's permission to open them in court. She slid one across. Your Honor, these confirm what has already been suggested. Sloane is, in fact, a direct descendant of my client. 17 years lost. Do not erase biology. The murmur that ran through the courtroom was not gossip, it was history changing its clothes. Riley's face froze, then cracked into something raw and ugly. She cannot be. This is theater, not science. Sloane stood on her own, air voice trembling but true. I did not come here for money. I came because I wanted to know where I came from. You used that longing as a weapon. No more. For a moment, even marble seemed to lean forward. Riley tried one last gambit, pulling out a sheaf of papers, some sort of hurried contract granting them power of attorney. They thrust it toward the bench as if paper could erase blood. Marin was ready. Your Honor, she said evenly, those signatures were never witnessed properly. In fact, one of them belongs to a notary who has been deceased for 6 years. We have an affidavit from the Secretary of State's office confirming it. The judge lifted the document, held it to the light, and then dropped it back onto the table as if it were something foul. Forgery on top of fraud. She said, "You are digging your own grave. Counsel's client, and I have the shovel." The gallery broke into whispers. Riley's parents shifted in their seats, their faces hard as glass. One of them muttered, "Not quite quietly enough." This is what happens when outsiders think they matter. The words slithered across the room, ugly and sharp. I did not flinch. I lifted my chin and answered, "Point clear enough for the stenographer to catch every syllable. I matter enough to stand here. I matter enough to tell the truth. And unlike some, I do not need to forge the dead to carry my weight. That was the humiliation public. Precise. Undeniable. O'Reilly's posture collapsed in on itself. The jacket looked borrowed, the hair too carefully styled, the face too tight. For once, the performance had no audience willing to applaud. The judge's gavel came down again. The petition is denied with prejudice. Temporary injunction is granted. Petitioners are barred from any further claims pending a full criminal inquiry. Court is adjourned. The bailiff moved forward as Riley's attorney tried to salvage dignity. It slipped through his hands like sand. Sloane stepped toward me, not to embrace, not yet, but to stand beside me, shoulder to shoulder, as though she had chosen her side, finally and fully. Outside, the press had caught wind, flesh popped like fireworks, and questions flew betrayal. Millions. Adoption. Fraut. Marin shielded me with her briefcase. Winters with her body. Nina with her glare. Sloane walked beside me, holding that photograph like a compass. Riley's voice followed down the steps. High and shrill. This isn't over. You think the court makes you family. Blood doesn't fix character. You'll regret this. Both of you. I turned once, only once, and answered with the plainest truth I had. I already regretted trusting you. I will not regret surviving you. The cameras caught it. The city would read it by dinner. But the words were not for them. They were for me. And for the person standing beside me who had carried a photo for 17 years, waiting for a voice to match the face. That was the reckoning. Not just papers and judges, but the public stripping of pretense, the exposure of lies, and the first fragile threads of something new and real. The story was not over. Courtrooms rarely end things neatly. But for the first time in weeks, I felt the ground beneath me solid and the air in my lungs free of smoke. The days after the hearing passed like a storm clearing. The phone rang with reporters, friends, distant cousins who had never sent a birthday card but suddenly remembered my number. I let Marin screen them all. What I needed was not noise but quiet, is the kind that lets a person hear their own bones, settling after being rattled too long. Winters stopped by often, sometimes with soup, sometimes just to sit and fold the hospital bills into neat piles. Nina stayed, too, pacing my kitchen and muttering dark jokes about Riley's fall from grace. The city loves a scandal. She said once, pouring coffee into chipped mugs, but it loves a comeback more. So, what's your plan? My plan, as it turned out, was smaller than scandal. I wanted to stand without wobbling. I wanted to breathe without counting. I wanted to learn who Sloane was beyond a photograph and a courtroom confession. She came to visit one Saturday, carrying a bag of pastries, and that same cautious smile. We sat at the table like two people meeting through glass, each tapping to see if the pain would hold. She told me about her adoptive parents' teachers, steady and kind. I told her about Douglas, about summers at his country house when I was a child, about the way he believed wealth was a tool, not a crown. At one point, she looked down, twisting the napkin in her hands. I thought I would feel angry. She admitted, finding out you gave me up. Finding out so much was hidden. But mostly, I feel relieved. Like the questions in my chest finally have somewhere to land. I swallowed hard and answered. The only way I could. I was 17. Scared, foolish, and too proud to ask for help. I thought giving you away was the kindest choice. I see now it was also the hardest. I am sorry you had to carry the weight of my silence. She reached across the table, then, not for an embrace, but for my hand. Her grip was warm, steady. We both carried silence. She said, maybe now we can put it down. In the weeks that followed, the pieces of my life began to fit differently. The trust fund, locked tight for now, was still there, a sum too large to feel real. More than $26 million waiting in escrow. Marin managed it with her usual cool precision, reminding me that patience is often the best revenge. Let the law do its work. She said, you do not need to swing the hammer. The system already has one. Riley, meanwhile, I found themselves the subject of a criminal investigation fraud. Forgery. Attempted theft. Their name appeared in the papers. Not beside gallery openings, but beside court dates. The jacket that once looked like armor now looked like costume. I did not celebrate. I simply noted the way character, as Douglas wrote, pays dividends when the market is down. One evening, I invited Sloane and her adoptive parents to the old estate house. We walked through rooms that smelled of dust and memory. I showed them Douglas's study, lined with books no one had touched in years. Her mother ran a hand over the spines. Her father peered out the tall windows. And Sloane stood in the middle, eyes wide, as if she had stepped into a storybook that had been waiting for her at dinner. Laughter came easier than I expected. Her parents thanked me not for money, not for history, but for letting them into the circle rather than drawing a line. We have always told her she was loved twice over, her mother said, once by us and once by whoever brought her into the world. Tonight proves we were right. Later, after they left, Sloane and I stood on the porch watching the sky darken. She broke the silence first. Do you think we can really build something? After all that's happened, I looked at her and saw not the past, but possibility. I think we already are. Brick by brick. Story by story. Not perfect. Not easy. But real. The months ahead promised trials. Legal ones for Riley. Personal ones for me. Healing is not linear. Some mornings I still woke to pain in my ribs and a heaviness in my chest. But the difference was this. I no longer woke alone. There was Nina's steady friendship, Winter's kindness, Marin's sharp counsel, and Sloane's presence, a daughter I had once lost, now returned not by magic, but by truth, clawing its way into daylight. On the anniversary of the crash, I hosted a gathering at the estate. We lit candles for the people we had lost, spoke names that deserved air, and raised glasses to the stubbornness of survival. As the night wound down, I found myself on the porch again, Sloane beside me, the stars overhead like punctuation marks on a story still being written. Do you regret it? She asked softly. Not the inheritance, not the scandal, but all of it. The betrayal, the crash, the court. I thought for a long while before answering. Regret means I would choose differently if given the chance, and I would not, because without all of it, I would not have found you, and finding you is worth every bruise, every lie, every long night. She leaned her head against my shoulder, then, quiet and sure, the world outside the estate walls kept spinning trials, scandals, headlines, but inside, there was a new family forming, chosen and stitched together, not by convenience or greed, but by something sturdier. We did not speak again that night. We did not need to. The silence we shared was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of belonging. And that, more than any fortune, was the true inheritance